Our next speaker, we're very lucky to have Professor Elizabeth Macdonald, Associate Professor of City and Regional Planning and Urban Design at the Berkeley University of California. Professor Macdonald is an urban designer and an architect, and is focused on a wide range of street and place effects, and that totally overwrites a lot of very skillful work that is in her resume. She's published and an award-winning author. In her role in consultancy, in the consultancy CityWorks, Professor Macdonald has worked on projects across North America, including several projects here in Metro Vancouver. And she also seems to be able to stretch time because, like many other of our speakers, she's also an active educator, and she still works and teaches in the field of urban design, and she chairs international symposia and workshops, and probably does everything else in between. I'd like you to welcome Professor Elizabeth Macdonald.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I get to do something fun here today. The organizers of this conference asked me to talk about a project that Alan Jacobs and I have done through our firm CityWorks. It's Octavia Boulevard, which is a wonderful project that we really enjoy doing it, and it's a great success story. So I think it's appropriate at this time in the conference, all of you here today, that I'm going to tell you about a feel-good story. But I want to put it in a context of how does a really good placemaking project happen? What are the various things that need to come together? You know, how did it actually work? And then we'll look at where Octavia Boulevard is today, which was really fun for me to be able to go out and just spend some time there for this conference to see what was going on. So this is a story about the importance of articulating a vision, a planning vision, a desire for a community, and doing what it takes to think about what is wanted, even in spite of what seem like insurmountable odds to anything ever happen. So it's about a planning vision. It's a story about challenging street standards and norms, which is a subject matter that's dear to my heart. It's a story about the importance of community activism. Community activism, because really, in this story, nothing would have happened without the local community making it happen. And then finally, it's also a story about innovation and about what the marvelous thing that urban design can do, which is allowing for many, many things to happen, even things that you don't know could ever possibly happen. So it's about the serendipity that goes with urban design once it's embedded into a community. So, first a little history. So in the 1950s and 1960s, San Francisco, like so many other North American cities, was really hell-bent on building freeways as part of the federal highways program. Pedestrians were not a concern. Limited access, fast auto movement was the absolute priority. And of course, this was all done in the name of national defense. In San Francisco, believe it or not, in 1948, there was a plan prepared. It was called the Trafficways Plan, and it called for a network of 8 freeways crisscrossing and surrounding the city. It's sort of mind-boggling to think back on this diagram, for any of you that know San Francisco, which I'm sure many of you do, to imagine what the city would have been like if this plan was put into place. Literally, there would have been freeways on either side of Golden Gate Park. Freeways going up Van Ness Avenue, freeway along much of the northern waterfront. So by a decade later, after that plan had been built, San Franciscans could see what the freeways looked like. Along the Embarcadero, a double-deck freeway was built. It ran in front of San Francisco's Ferry Building, which stands at the foot of Market Street. It's a double-decker freeway. It separated the city from the waterfront. It's amazing to look back at those pictures and think about what it actually looked like. Now, there was another double-decker freeway that was built as well. This was the Central Freeway, which really tore apart the Hayes Valley neighborhood, which is a lovely neighborhood of mostly old Victorians in the center of the city, behind City Hall, that wasn't damaged as part of the 1906 earthquake, so it still retained a lot of its historic fabric. And when this freeway was built in, I believe it was 1959, it really cut that little neighborhood in half. And it blocked views of City Hall as well. So, and it created an environment like this. It was a very dark environment underneath the freeway, which basically was a place for prostitution. It was a place for drug dealings. It was not a place that you want it to be. It was also a place of a lot of parked cars and utility vehicles for the transportation authority and the like. It really divided this neighborhood extraordinarily. I love this picture. The Freeway Revolt that happened in 1959, it stopped the Embarcadero Freeway and the Central Freeway cold in mid-construction, leaving unfinished spurs, which were a reminder to everybody of where the freeways were headed, what they were going to do. And importantly, at that time, when the Freeway Revolt happened, and the city agreed to stop all of the freeways and to give back the federal money that had been available for building those freeways, to say, no, we don't want the federal money. This is our city. We want to keep it the way we want to keep it. And they also enacted a policy. It became the policy of the city to not build any more freeways, which is important. So during the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, San Francisco created many new policies and also enacted the urban design plan. This is an image from the plan, and it became much more focused on the experiential qualities of the city and how to preserve those qualities, and to make sure that new development would not adversely affect the city and all the wonderful characters of the city that everybody knew and loved and appreciated. In 1973, the city adopted a transit-first policy and made transit rather than autos the centerpiece of its transportation master plan. And the plan also put in place policies to encourage bicycling and walking. At the same time, the city undertook a number of small projects that emphasized pedestrian spaces and local walking. These are images from today in the DuBose Triangle neighborhood. These were put in during that time, actually when Alan Jacobs was the planning director of San Francisco. Gathering places were created at intersections by eliminating some parking spaces, widening sidewalks, planting trees, and then later local residents planted benches and put more planting in place. And these are these wonderful spaces today that really makes the DuBose neighborhood a very special place. Neighborhoods lacking parks, the city created pocket parks and vacant lots, such as this one on 24th Street in the Mission District. This is, by the way, is along a predominantly commercial street. So at the same time, and this is really critical, the San Francisco city planning staff, under the direction of Alan Jacobs and then others, did studies to show that the Embarcadero Freeway was never necessary in the first place, that traffic could in fact work at grade, and that traffic could work in the city while the freeway, if the freeway was taken down, that it could work during that time. That became the adopted policy of the city. Of course, there was no money to implement that policy at the time, but the studies were done, and they were put on the shelf, and they remained as policy of the city. So then what happened? Of course, and what about the Central Freeway? Well, no particular studies were done for this freeway. It wasn't as prominent as the Embarcadero Freeway, which went around the downtown. But there was a constantly active citizens group that started a movement to take this freeway down. So then, 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake happened. It caused enormous destruction, including damage to freeways all around the Bay Area. In Oakland, the double-deck Cypress Freeway collapsed. A section of the Bay Bridge fell. And of course, in San Francisco, both of the city's two double-deck freeways, the Embarcadero Freeway and the Central Freeway, were severely damaged. So then the question became what to do take one or both of them down, repair one or both. There were advocates on both sides of the issues for both freeways. So for the Embarcadero Freeway, the deciding factor may very well have been that study and the designs done in the 1970s by the planning department, although it's really interesting because it took a man from Caltrans who remembered the study to point to it and get it down off of the shelf. That was done, and the decision was made rather quickly to take the double-decked freeway down and to build instead a transit boulevard. So this is what it looks like today. This made a huge contribution to the whole Embarcadero as a walking and promenading area from Fisherman's Wharf to the new Giants baseball field. It made possible the rehabilitation of the ferry building as a market hall and an expanded ferry terminal. And the street itself is now a major walking destination in the city. And Market Street is reconnected to its waterfront. So deciding what to do with the damaged Central Freeway was much more contentious. The most badly damaged part of the Central Freeway was that northern part that's going up towards Van Ness Avenue. That was taken down in 1992. And then in 1996, the upper deck of the freeway was taken down because it was quite damaged as well. But what to do with the remaining freeway? Well, this really started a new freeway war in San Francisco, which is really interesting. In 1997, people from the outer Sunset, those western parts of the city, sponsored a surprise ballot measure to rebuild the freeway. It caught the local people living in Hayes Valley off guard. It caught a number of people off guard. And that initiative passed. It passed by a small margin. What to do? Well, the following year, in 1998, Hayes Valley residents, led by this woman, Patricia Walkup, and also a local architect, Robin Levitt, sponsored another ballot measure, this time to take the freeway down and instead to build a surface multi-way boulevard. They used a graphic example from Alan Jacobs' book, Great Streets, to show what it was that they wanted. This measure passed and now became the policy of the city. So Jake and I we'd formed our firm CityWorks, and we were hired to design the boulevard because, frankly, nobody really knew how to design a multi-way boulevard. In fact, they could not be built in the United States because standards and norms would not allow them to be built. This is why. This is the form of a multi-way boulevard. It basically has 3 roadways, a center roadway in the middle for fast-moving through traffic, and slow local access roads on either side. Well, you can imagine what the intersections are like. Many more so-called conflict points than a normally configured intersection, and so these types of streets were considered unsafe. Now, the key thing is that Jake and I were doing a study on boulevards at the time at UC Berkeley, and we'd been comparing multi-way boulevards to normally configured streets carrying the same amount of traffic, and we were finding that, in fact, multi-way boulevards were not less safe than normally configured streets if they were well designed, and being well designed was the absolute key. I'll go back to this slide. The key is creating a very strong pedestrian realm on the side of the boulevard, traffic calmed realm, and that allows a street that will accommodate relatively fast, although not super fast, through traffic, at the same time that you have a traffic calm local realm on the side. So in situations where you do need to handle large amounts of traffic, we thought it was a pretty good model. So this is what was the configuration that was planned for Octavia Boulevard. So the freeway would come down at Market Street, the boulevard, and then the traffic would transition into this one-way couplets on Fell and Oak Street and continue out towards the western part of the city. One of the things that was critical about this design in our minds, was to keep the new boulevard absolutely as narrow as we possibly could. Because when that freeway had been built, basically one side of Octavia Boulevard had been sliced off. All of the houses, the Victorian houses, had been torn down, so there was this funny jagged edge. There was no frontage anymore along the street. So to keep, it's really critical to have frontage along the edge of the boulevard, or that side access road doesn't make sense. And we also wanted to re-knit the street back together. So we didn't take the whole right-of-way available to us. We kept it as narrow as possible. There were constraints that were given to us in terms of the amount of traffic we had to handle in the center roadway. But we basically did it in 133 feet. Now, in truth, if we had the chance to do it over again, we would have tried to make the side realm narrower. You see the dimension of 18 feet there, which is for one travel lane and one lane of parking. It was the lowest that we could get because of the various standards relative to particularly fire engines. We argued that fire engines could fight a fire from the central roadway, but the fire department wanted to be able to get access to the side roadway. So we were constrained with this 18-foot dimension, and we also, by the way, proposed that there would be a rolled curb on the inside of that side median so that the fire truck could hop the median and therefore effectively have the amount of clearance space that they wanted. But it's really important to keep that side realm slow moving. And by the way, in San Francisco, we have a very strong bicycle coalition, and they got it. We kept using the phrase, no one gets everything, everyone gets a lot, as a way to try and mitigate between all the different needs and uses of this street. And they understood. They could have pushed for having a bicycle lane in the center roadway, which would have been their ideal situation. But instead, they recognized the importance of getting the frontage along the boulevard, and so they said, okay, we're okay with traveling along the side access roadway, even though it means we'll have to stop at a stop sign at every intersection. That's okay. We get something pretty good out of this. And that's to show you that even in certain places, the frontage lots that we would get were very small, less than 15 feet wide. But we figured San Francisco is a place with ingenuity, and somebody would figure out development that could happen in that area. Another key design concern was how would the intersections actually be designed? So we had a mixed team on the design team that included traffic engineers as well as ourselves, and the engineers really would have been much more comfortable with a street design like this, where you had the traffic returning to the center roadway at every intersection. We argued instead, and the local community agreed, that it was actually better to have the through traffic going through on the side roadway so that that sign realm could remain, basically once you're in the pedestrian or the local realm, you could remain in it. You didn't have to go back out into that freeway traffic or that fast-moving traffic. And also, this would make it much better for bicyclists. So it was finally left up to the community to decide, and this is the configuration that they decided on. Now, the other key thing, and Jake and I think this is the most wonderful thing that we were actually able to do with this boulevard, is how the boulevard ended. When we arrived on the scene, the idea was that from the boulevard, going back to the existing Hayes Street, which was about 60 feet wide, there would just be staggered development that would happen through that space. It seemed clear to us that there was an opportunity to get a park, a new community park, because this neighborhood was very underserved by parks. And so that was a diagram that we drew on that drawing the very first day when we sat down to try and think about how that should be designed. And that became a really important thing for the neighborhood. It links up with Hayes Street, the street here at the end, which is the local shopping street. Okay, so what happened? Our design was on the boards, it had been accepted. The next year, there were, in 1999, there were 2 ballot measures. 2, one to rebuild the freeway, and the other, again sponsored by the local neighborhood, to build the boulevard as we had designed it. And I think the fact that we had a design that people could see in front of them was really helpful in getting people to finally say, yes, let's build the boulevard. And so that initiative passed, not by a large margin, but enough for the city to go ahead with it. So this is what it looked like when things started coming down. It was wonderful. All the community came out and had a huge celebration. One of the supervisors struck the first blow, if you will. And then you can see that the image on the left is with the freeways coming down at Market Street, and then this is the new boulevard as it was being constructed. So what's it like today? Yes, traffic on the freeway does slow down when it comes into the city, and I would argue that that's really appropriate. That's appropriate. It does back up a bit on the Central Freeway. And so it becomes a gateway into this new traffic calm pedestrian realm. And by the way, people always ask, what happened to the traffic? Well, basically, Octavia Boulevard carries about half the traffic that the freeway did. The rest was absorbed into the grid. It didn't have any huge impact on any one place. It basically just disappeared. Nobody knows exactly where it went to, but basically people adapted. They adapted to it. And the other wonderful thing that happened is because we were also involved in doing a neighborhood plan for the neighborhood, to think about what could happen for all those parcels, all those red parcels above Market Street, those all became available for development. And in the plan, it was decided that most of it would be put towards affordable housing. And we also, when we were doing that plan, lowered parking requirements. We basically said any new housing that has been built there, you cannot build one-to-one parking. You have to build less than that in order to keep it affordable. And so there was a great benefit to this, not only the neighborhood, but to the city as a whole. So this is what it looks like about 5 years ago when the trees were starting to fill in. Nice environment for auto drivers, frankly, as well as for local people. And then this is from more recently. This is a picture taken from what I always think of as Hayes Green, but in fact, it's now named Patricias Green because in honor of Patricia Walkup, who unfortunately died the year after Octavia Boulevard was finally constructed, and so the community decided that this green should be really named after her, so it's now called Patricias Green. And the wonderful thing, the juxtaposition between a local community park, and the boulevard. Yes, it's a lot of traffic there, but somehow having this park space and having all the trees and the greenery allows lots and lots of just community activity to happen, and it's really become the heart of this neighborhood. Just more images. Everybody uses this space. So this is right next to a roadway that carries 44,000 cars a day. Pretty interesting, huh? It actually is very tranquil feeling. There's a space in the middle of the park for rotating displays of public art. This one what is currently up, it's called Ecstasy. And then as we move further down the boulevard, how does that operate? Well, the side realm really does help to create a more pedestrian-friendly environment, even with all of that traffic in the middle. So those side medians are enough for people to walk to stop, and you'll notice that the area that they need to cross to before they get to another pedestrian refuge is very small. It's only 22 feet, and again on the other side. So it works well to help tame all of that traffic. And notice as well that the idea of there being two different realms works well as well. Now, granted, sometimes you get people who want to come over into the side realm and speed by if there's traffic congestion in the middle, but by and large, that doesn't happen too much. And so you have a situation that looks more like this, where all the traffic is in the middle like it should be, and that allows for this pedestrian realm to happen along along the edge. It feels more like a local street than a big arterial. And bicyclists as well use the side access roadway, and it works well for them. Now I want to point out, you see behind them, what's going on in there? It's really interesting, some of the things that have started to happen along the side of the boulevard. Because of course there's been an economic downturn. And even though those sites along the boulevard have been set aside for affordable housing, and there are developers in line to build that housing, there's been a problem getting funding. So the question is what to do in the meantime. Well, one of the things that's happened in one of those very narrow lots is this. It's a community garden. It's really wonderful. It's called the Growing Home Community Garden. It's a part of a project that was started by Mayor Gavin Newsom called Project Homeless Connect. And it's really about growing food for homeless in the area and also for local residents. So we have tomatoes growing along the side of what used to be a freeway. And we have urban gardeners along the side of what used to be a freeway. And we have food along what used to be a freeway. Now, what about the rest of the neighborhood? Well, this project has really revitalized the neighborhood as a commercial area, and there are many new cafes that are opening in the surrounding area. And there's a lot of walkability, very much street-oriented area, and a lot of people come to this area now to just hang out and be. And it's wonderful what it spurred. Another thing that's happened is that there's an alley just to the side of Patricias Green, which has now been redesigned as a living alley. And eventually, what's happened is that halfway down this alley, there is a local cafe called Blue Bottle Coffee, and they built a wonderful little green street, a little parklet. And the idea is that eventually this whole street will become like that, a pedestrian street. And then right next to the park itself, there is a rather large parcel that is slated for affordable housing, but what to do in the meantime to activate it? Because in the plan it says there should be ground floor retail there. Well, in lieu of development happening, the city has decided to lease this space. They've leased it to a group called Proxy Development, who's brought in these really containers that can be used for retail. So this is Smitten Ice Cream. It's a local maker of ice cream, and she has a special nitrous oxygen machine that she has developed that has a patent on, and she'll make fresh ice cream in 1 minute for anybody who wants it. And it's a great place for the community to come together. Just around the corner from that is Ritual Coffee, and there's actually a space for a temporary pop-up museum as well with exhibitions. These are people at Ritual Coffee, and there's been some wonderful large-scale art that's happened on some of the buildings. You're probably wondering what that says. It actually says brighter, faster. Brighter, faster. So a way of taking over some of those blank wall facades that were left over from the freeway construction. So in conclusion, I would just like to pause and look at that for a moment. How you can actually, in spite of the incredible automobile place that this used to be, with community action, with advanced thinking from the planning department, with people just jumping in and making happen what can happen, you can get a place like this, and it's a possibility of transforming an automobile city that I hope might give inspiration to some of you in your own cities. Thank you very much.